Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. We're going to dive back into the FinCEN files today, folks, and we're going to hear what Sherrod Brown has to say. And now, Sherrod Brown is the top Democrat who sits on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. And he has some pretty strong opinions about what should happen to these banksters. And I'll tell you what, I agree 100% with him. There is no place in our society for people like these banksters to be able to get away with what they've gotten away with all the way back to, I'll just use 2008 and 2009, the financial crisis, as an example. There are plenty more throughout history. But the banking system has provided the lifeblood for operations like Jeffrey Epstein's since the beginning. And there has been no accountability ever. These people have never, ever, ever had to be held responsible for any of this. Oh yeah, like we talked about, a few fines, $150 million here, chump change to these people, drop in the bucket. No criminal penalties, though. None of these people have went to prison. None of these people have had to face real repercussions. Meanwhile, if it was me or you, passing a bad check or involved in money laundering in whatever degree, do you really think we'd be shown the same sort of treatment that these banksters are shown? Of course not. We don't have lawyers that can navigate the loopholes, do we? We don't have lawyers that are going to swim around in the muck for $2,000 an hour and find some technicalities. I mean, maybe some of us do out there listening to the podcast. I certainly don't. Thankfully, I have a few friends who are lawyers that I could rely on if I ever needed some legal help. But for the average person, nobody has the kind of money these people have to put together these sorts of defenses and to protect themselves. Do you really think that you or I or the average person wouldn't be in prison for 1,000,000 years if we attempted even a percentage of what these people get away with, what seems to be on a daily basis? Of course not. And finally, somebody in the Senate, somebody with some power, is saying something about it. Now, we all know, words are wind, right? Is Sherrod Brown going to actually do something about this? Or is he just going to be another person who talks the talk, but doesn't walk the walk? Let's jump into this article from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and see what's going on. This article was authored by Michael Sala. Headline: Jail bankers who allow money laundering. Top Democrat in U.S. Senate Banking Committee says in the wake of the FinCEN files. Senator Sherrod Brown calls for criminally prosecuting executives who profit from moving money for criminals and corrupt regimes. How long have I been talking about that now, folks, huh? It's nice to see somebody in a place of power actually knows what the hell they're talking about, and at least in this one circumstance has their head screwed on correctly. There needs to be personal penalties for these people. If they're engaging in this, if they're allowing this, if they're creating a culture where this is allowed to exist, why should they not be held responsible? In the wake of the FinCEN files revelations about global banks profiting from the flow of dirty money, the top Democrat on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee says American authorities should prosecute bankers who allow their institutions to profit from moving money for criminals and corrupt regimes. Well, I agree, Mr. Brown, but you would probably have to start with a lot of your corrupt colleagues. How many of your colleagues benefit from offshore companies? How many of your colleagues benefit directly or indirectly, one way or the other, from people just like Jeffrey Epstein? We read through all of the people who received donations from Epstein, returned or not. And it was a who's list of American political power players. So when we hear these politicians talk about they want laws on the books to jail people for these financial crimes, of course, I support it 100%. Are they going to have the courage to see it all the way through, though? Are they going to have the courage to put it as a standalone bill, no pork, no garbage, and put it up for a vote? Let's see what's what. But we have seen a lot of these politicians give us a lot of lip service throughout the years. So is Sherrod Brown going to go down as another big mouth, do nothing? Or is he really going to hold his colleagues responsible and hold them accountable and really enact change? I think if some bankers go to jail, that stuff stops happening, U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio said in a telephone interview with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. One or two big deal bankers going to jail and the world will change a bit. Yeah, I agree 1,000%. You throw somebody like, I don't know, insert any giant banker here who was involved in criminal activity, who was involved in money laundering, who was involved in this shit, and boy, oh boy, would it change things. I have a few that I can recommend that have obvious financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein. We can get a twofer here, right? Get one of Jeffrey Epstein's buddies and give these senators a huge banker or a financial trader who is involved in sex trafficking as well. That's a win for everybody, Mr. Brown. So let's get started, right? Let's get some subpoenas drawn up. Let's see what some of Jeffrey Epstein's banker buddies have to say about that. Brown said that should Democrats win back the Senate next month, he would use his new position as committee chairman next year to scrutinize the lack of prosecutions and those banks that blatantly allow dirty monies to flow through the institutions. Well, better late than never. Better late than never, right? So, if the Democrats do win back the Senate, let's remember to hold them accountable for this, right? Let's make sure we remember to hold Sherrod Brown accountable for going after these banksters. I mean, we had a bunch of years, 8 years under Obama where no banksters went to jail, not one during the financial crisis, and I'm pretty sure Sherrod Brown was around for that. So, is it just lip service, or are they really going to do something this time? ICIJ, BuzzFeed News, and other reporting partners found that big banks, including JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, and Deutsche Bank continued moving money for shadowy characters and criminal networks even after U.S. authorities fined these financial institutions for earlier failures to stem flows of illicit money. And we've talked about this ad nauseum at this point. All of those banks that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein, all of these banks that Jess Staley used to be at, that he's at now, have all been brought up when we're talking about the FinCEN files. So you mean to tell me he had no idea what was going on? You mean to tell me people like Glenn Dubin or Les Wexner had no idea what was going on financially? They had no clue, huh? They weren't involved with Jeffrey Epstein or his money laundering or his LLCs and front companies, huh? Not at all. All right, I guess if that's what you would like me to believe. I mean, That's the narrative, I guess. That's their defense, right? That's the only defense any of them have ever provided. Oh, no, not me. I never had anything to do with the guy. Meanwhile, they're sitting around breaking bread and watching the Jeffersons. I mean, are you kidding me right now? Brown credited the FinCEN files investigation with revealing the lack of forceful enforcement actions against banks that repeatedly violate the law, a problem that he hopes will be addressed by the proposed Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, which he is co-sponsoring with a bipartisan group of senators. Well, that's good. I mean, imagine they figure something out to agree on in Washington, D.C. Holy shit. Go tell your neighbors. the idiots in D.C. have figured something out that they agree on. Don't you think that would probably be a good starting point for all of these morons in D.C. anyway? How about we figure out the stuff we agree on and work out from there, as opposed to just showing up and looking for a fight? It's good to see that there's some bipartisan support for this. Now, again, will it be killed on the floor? Probably. We know that a lot of the powerful senators have been around, and I mean on both sides, folks, have been around D.C. way too long. They're embedded, and they've increased their wealth at a huge clip. Much faster than you or I are increasing our wealth, I can promise you that. So if we're going to rely on these ancient, archaic scuzzbags to regulate themselves, I feel we're going to be sorely disappointed. Now, the only way to truly get these people to do that, to write these laws that benefit the people as opposed to benefiting their rich friends and themselves, is to vote all of these dinosaurs out of office and send a new crop of politician to D.C., one that's willing to do the people's work. The Finson Files series revealed long-standing problems involving willful violators of our nation's laws, Brown said. We're hopeful this new bill, that once it comes into law, and I think it will be a lot harder for them to violate these laws, and that they'll pay a price when they do. Well, good. I'd like to see the law when it's put into place, though, right? Let's see if there's any loopholes left in the law. Every single time one of these guys talks about writing a new law, I get skeptical. Because are they really going to not leave themselves a back door? You know, like a programmer writes a program, they leave themselves a backdoor entrance. Well, these guys, every time they write a law, they have to leave a backdoor exit for themselves, so that when they're done pillaging and looting, they have an exit strategy, right? So a lot of these laws are filled with loopholes and technicalities, and I think a lot of us have become quite aware of that as we followed the Jeffrey Epstein case and now the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. We're seeing it a lot. The proposed legislation, co-authored by Republican Senator Mike Crapo, Banking Committee Chair from Idaho, would boost penalties for repeat offenders and require limited liability companies to disclose the true owners, including those with at least 25% stake or who own a controlling interest. Currently, money launderers and other criminals hide behind shell companies created in Delaware, Wyoming, and other tax haven states to open bank accounts and move ill-gotten gains. And not only that, I've seen them use sports betting accounts, believe it or not. You know, people will park their money anywhere to keep it off the radar. So there are many, many different ways for people to launder money, right? But the most successful way, the most productive way, the most lucrative way is to have yourself a couple of shell companies set up and to do it with your buddies who actually work at the banks. Who knows how to jump through the loopholes better than them? Well, besides the politicians. The names would be shared with the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, known as FinCEN, which would provide the information under strict safeguards to law enforcement and other government agencies. Yeah, that would be nice, huh? Let's streamline this process. If you're a scumbag financial criminal, you should be in prison, okay? Now, I'm not saying you should be in the same prison that, one of these serial killers are in, or a high security prison, but you got to do your time, my man. If you're involved in financial crimes, sorry, you might be at a level 1 at a federal facility, but guess what? You have to do your time. This whole 2-tier justice system, this one set of rules for them and another set for us, that shit is over. Brown said the lack of criminal enforcement goes back to the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, when the Obama administration failed to aggressively prosecute executives behind the wave of financial fraud that led to the crash. I mean, really? Did you expect Obama to pursue this? Take a look at his team, folks. How many banksters were on his team? And I don't mean to just point out Obama. It's all of these guys, right? How many of the people that are involved with presidents are from financial institutions? All of them, it would seem like. Every single president. So you really think Obama and all of his advisors, his top advisors, his best buddies are going to okay him going after the banksters who caused this crash? Hell no. They were never going to be held responsible. And it's inauthentic for Sherrod Brown to bring it up, because there was a point in time when Obama had the House, he had the Senate, and they had the White House. There is no good damn reason why these laws couldn't have been enacted then, and these people couldn't have been brought to heel at that point. Also, it would have stopped Jeffrey Epstein's ability to move money. How many girls would not have been abused? How many girls would not had their lives ruined if they would have simply went after these banksters who helped facilitate all of this misery? One of the biggest mistakes of the Obama administration was that no one went to jail for high-level financial crimes, Brown said. Obama could have been more aggressive. The Justice Department should have been more aggressive, and the regulators should have been more aggressive. Oh yeah, hindsight's 20/20, isn't it? Easy to Monday morning quarterback that, isn't it, Mr. Brown? Weren't you around back then, sir? I mean, nobody held these guys accountable at all, and that was my biggest problem. The TARP wasn't very much fun either, started by Bush and carried out by Obama, but really the biggest problem was that nobody was held accountable for what occurred. I don't know about you guys, but I watched my 401k dwindle into nothing, and it took just until a few years ago for Vegas to pull itself back out of that hole. So these guys and these banksters who were behind all of it, who think that they are the masters of the universe and they control our lives, well, they're in for a rude awakening, because eventually, we're going to have politicians that don't just talk. Eventually, we're going to have politicians that decide to put foot to ass and get these bankers in line. Over the past decade, global banks like HSBC have been granted deferred prosecution agreements by the Justice Department even after they were found willfully breaking the law by laundering money for dangerous groups, including drug cartels and networks supporting Iran's nuclear weapons program, records show. HSBC was one of the first companies to ever give me an auto loan, an obscene, predatory auto loan. So, it's how they go about it, right? They screw us. They screw people like us when we're, young, before we've had a chance to build our credit. And then perhaps later on down the road, if you've been through, some issues and maybe your credit's been dinged up, well, they dive on top of you again. And it's a never-ending cycle, and they get you in their clutches. You're caught up in the debt trap, and there is literally no escape. And yet these banksters, after the financial collapse during COVID, they all reap the rewards. They all have their fingers in the cookie pot. But what's there for you, the American people? $600 that disappears after 12 weeks? Hey, thanks a lot, guys. Meanwhile, the banksters are literally raking in trillions. You see, it's all a big game. It's all about their buddies, and it's never about you. Now, I'd like to believe that Sherrod Brown is trying to turn that around here, but I'm not too convinced that he's going to really be able to push this over the goal line without serious, tremendous pushback from colleagues and the people that fund all of their campaigns. After HSBC was caught by the government, the bank kept moving money tied to criminal enterprises, including an international Ponzi scheme that bilked thousands of investors out of their savings, ICIJ and BuzzFeed found. HSBC, hell of an institution, huh? The day I paid off my car loan with those people was a fantastic day, folks. In fact, that loan was so ridiculously moronic when I'm talking young, before I was even in my 20s, that I ended up paying it off faster than I should have because it was such an outrageously predatory loan. And thankfully, I had a good job and I was, able to navigate that situation, but a lot of people can't. And these banks don't give two shits. They don't care one way or the other. Many political analysts predict that Democrats could take control of the Senate in the November 3rd elections. If that happens, Brown would take over as chairman of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. As the leader, he told ICIJ he'd be in an even better position to examine big banks' practices and the dirty money sloshing around the world. These are some big comments by Mr. Brown, and I hope that all of you are ready to hold him accountable. You see, this is an election year, right? So a lot of these people are going to be making these big, grandiose claims, and they're going to be promising us a lot. Well, I'm in the business of holding these politicians accountable these days, and I know you are too. So make sure you mark this one down. Make sure that if there is a blue wave and the Democrats do take the Senate, that Mr. Sherrod Brown, one of the first pieces of legislation that you're going to pump through, is this piece of legislation. And if you don't, well, sir, we'll know you for the liar that a lot of people think you are. The issues are important because money laundering is absolutely not a victimless crime, Brown said. No shit, it's not. No shit, it's not a victimless crime. And that is one thing that we've established here throughout our talking of the Finson files, right? As relation to the Jeffrey Epstein case, we know that all of this money laundering, all of this washing of money, and all of this financial skullduggery was what helped and facilitated this crime ring and its behavior to go on for decades. Do you really think that if they weren't able to launder this money, if they weren't able to wash this money, that they'd be able to do what they were able to do? Hell no, they couldn't. The only way for them to stay off of the radar and for them to be able to operate the way that they were able to operate is for them to have help from the banks themselves. And I'm not talking about the tellers or the branch manager, folks, all right? I'm talking about the scumbags in the personal wealth management division. I'm talking about the Jess Staleys of the world. I'm talking about the Leon Blacks and the Glenn Dubins of the world. You know, so-called polite society, but we know what they really are. We know what their real faces hold. As an example, he pointed to ICIJ's reporting on Ihor Kolomoisky, a Ukrainian billionaire who has been accused by U.S. prosecutors of secretly plowing hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from a Ukrainian bank into investments in Ohio and other places in the American heartland. Ohio, huh? That's where Sherrod Brown is from. I wonder, what does Les Wexner know about that? It's his fiefdom, right? Is Les Wexner going to let Sherrod Brown really pursue this? I don't know. We're going to see, right? We are going to see. What I will say is this. These are some lofty claims being made by Senator Brown, and I, for one, plan on holding him accountable. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at Bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. All right, folks, I'll be back later and we'll pick it back up then.